I'm Kevin Owens, an artist, educator from Dallas, Texas. I studied painting and drawing at Stephen F. Austin University. You know, growing up, I was always making things, being creative. It wasn't until high school, I went to Booker T. Washington High School, but I went for theater as well as Griner. I went there for theater as well. And it was there that I got the behind the scenes, the scenic design, the scenic painting, the prop making, all the aspects of theater that really create a mood is what sort of, in my mind, like a light bulb went off, and I was just like, okay, I'm much more interested in the making, the creating, the atmosphere of making something versus the performance aspect. And so that's really what made me decide, okay, I think I better go to art school. And I started off as more traditional painter, I would say. Very detailed, realistic, you know, setting up still lifes, plain art, landscape painting. And that was really the draw for me was, you know, looking at these master painters and, you know, seeing the versatility, seeing that they were able to, you know, capture light and shadow and, you know, just have that fidelity with paint is just, you know, that magic is what really drew me to painting. Yeah, I would say this is a departure from just the work that I was doing last year, but I will say that I was working on a lot of discrete ideas, well, similar ideas, but the way that they appeared were, you know, discrete in terms of, you know, the landscape, the figure, and this work really has allowed me to bring all of those together in a way that is very fulfilling. So a lot of the ideas, the content is very similar. It's just the expression of it has kind of changed. Essentially, the work is speaking about some of the social and political unrest that this country is experiencing, as well as, you know, globally things are kind of in flux. And so my thinking was, how can I, you know, speak about those things that, you know, my own family has experienced, but still, you know, make it broad. Well, like for these pieces, like the clear figures. So that's an image of a person that's being lynched. Now I've abstracted that form. It's undergone a transformation so that, you know, it's referencing a tragic event, but at the same time, it's, you know, I don't want to necessarily make an icon out of suffering or, you know, a traumatic experience and have that, you know, be solely what it is. I want to, in some sense, you know, open it up to possibilities of, you know, where we've been and where we can go, but, you know, acknowledging those horrific things, but at the same time, like showing a way forward. These were actually photos from a road trip that I took down 45. And that's something that moving forward, I think I'd like to do more specific locations. These aren't necessarily, you know, spaces that have any significance to me. They were just, you know, from my travels, and they're Texas landscapes. I think that's important, but maybe sites that are more specific to some things that have some historical significance, I think is a direction that I'm moving towards. Well, they start as charcoal drawings on prime gessoed panels, and I seal them, and from there I will do a wash, these color washes, but I'm masking so that the underpainting will be visible, or the original state, and that's really what the work is about too. It's like this idea of the process and having evidence of the creation of the piece be there in the final work itself, which to me ties into, the content of like the history of, African Americans in this country, this sort of unfulfilled thing. Acrylic washes, and I'm essentially dividing the paintings. There's a cross, a white cross, and that divides the canvas. It intersects, sometimes it intersects on the piece, sometimes the intersection happens outside the piece itself, but that's what those white bands are, and you can kind of see that with the way those diagonals in this particular painting would intersect off of the piece. And all the color, it essentially slices the painting, it divides the work. And again, it ties into this idea of these sort of arbitrary lines that we create within ourselves, as well as externally, boundaries, or states of emotional states like greed or hatred, and like reconciling those differences somehow. This work has really allowed me to really play with the material in a way that I haven't used before. The scraping, the abrasions in certain parts of the strips, for me, again, tie back to the landscape. I think of an aerial view of the land, and you think of farmland, and you see those rows of farming or areas where the earth has been gouged. So that is in some way a reference to that. And again, you're seeing all of that through these clear shapes that are only visible through the negative shapes around it, or the negative blocks of color around it. Again, this idea of division, of dividing the space. So yes, there is this sense of traditional illusionistic space, but at the same time, playing with color, the use of color, these strips, these blocks, has allowed me to reassert the picture plane and the surface. So again, there's just this collision of forms that are happening, that to me ties into the content of the work. These sort of arbitrary distinctions that are happening, and here I'm doing it with color and white or non-colored spaces, and that's the idea with the process. Will it ever reconcile? Are these planes of color, these opaque and transparent planes of color, coalescing? Are they expanding? So there's some tension and ambiguity in terms of what those forms are doing on the picture plane, on the surface. And that's really what I've hoped to achieve is, how can I use these elements in a way that completely speaks on the larger, deeper aspects of the political and social aspects that we're experiencing. How can I transform those forms to align with that? Titles are a challenge for me. This one, I think I titled it Cadet Gray, and that one Black Baby, Rose Quartz. So again, it's these ideas of color, but the cadet gray is the color of Confederate armies suit that they wore. So it was just another way for me to bring in these ideas without explicitly, having a soldier or a fighter or, a figure in the work to point to the meaning. And the black baby is really funny. Now that came from that whole Markle interview that they had. At one point they were talking about the baby. They were concerned about the skin tone of the baby. And I don't know, just like in my mind, I was just like, that's so, like, it's so deep. Like the way it just resonated with me, like that is in their psyche, in their consciousness. And I don't know, it just plays into where we're at, how far we've not come in terms of who we are overall, all of us. And this idea of, light and dark and what that means, and whose values are asserted. And so yeah, I don't know, it's kind of strange, but again, I wanted to touch on that idea. I'm just abstracting those forms, and so they do kind of, I don't know, they're very playful, but what they reference is not, so it's kind of disarming, I think. But again, that's the idea. I don't necessarily want to make a mandala of hate, of malice, of greed, even though that is what led to things like that. And sort of, bringing all of those, acknowledging all of those things that are inside all of us and reconciling those things, right? And that's what, again, the charcoal, that transformation that can occur, it has so many possibilities to be used for something. It's the application of charcoal as heat or light, that's really interesting to me. And that depth. There are a lot of masters that have come before me that I'm acknowledging, but I hope to, have filtered it through my own experience and create something that's mine.